when I applied to college, there's only one program that I actually wanted to get into, that I actually cared about. I didn't want to move anywhere and I didn't want to go out of state, so I didn't apply to that many places. And I wasn't interested in medicine, but 2 of the medical programs that I applied to rejected me. Then I heard back from the program that I actually wanted to get into, and they waitlisted me. I was crushed. I had the 4th highest average in my graduating class of about 580 kids, and I did alright on the SAT, but it felt like none of it mattered. I just felt like a complete failure, like I was incompetent, or that maybe I couldn't reach my goals. Looking back at the experience, I feel like I beat myself up a lot more than was necessary. That program actually took me off the waiting list a few months after they waitlisted me, and I graduated with my degree last May 2021. To be honest, if I didn't get into the program, certain things like scholarships or financial aid would have been easier for me. But the question is, when we experience rejection of any form, in school, at work, in our relationships, why does it hurt so much? And how do we deal with it better? I mentioned all of these areas because rejection is similar across all of these areas. It's not very different. And the reason why it hurts isn't because we're weak or too sensitive, though that might be a contributing factor. According to Lori Gottlieb, a marriage and family therapist and author of Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, the reason why rejection is painful is because there is an evolutionary reason why we want people to accept us. But she explains that in ancient times, people had to rely on groups and tribes in order to survive. There weren't nations or states like we have them now. So to be rejected goes against a very social and primal need. According to Leslie Becker Phelps, a psychologist and author of Bouncing Back from Rejection, build the resilience you need to get back up when life knocks you down. Very long title, by the way. Our response to rejection depends on our attachment styles. It has to do with the way we form relationships, and that has to do with our early environment with our caregiver. People who interacted with their caregivers in supportive and nurturing environments tend to form what's called secure attachment. They see themselves as lovable and worthy. On the other hand, those with insecure attachment styles end up seeing themselves as unworthy and inadequate. And these folks have a harder time dealing with rejection. But hope is not lost. There are still some ways to cope, and let's get right into it. Don't idealize that person or that situation. Sometimes when we experience rejection, we really build up the person or that thing that rejected us. So like the school that turned us down suddenly becomes the most prestigious institution, or really out of reach, where the person that rejected us seems like the most amazing woman. So this is something that Dr. Robert Firestone calls a fantasy bond, which is basically something that a lot of couples experience. It's an illusion of connection when couples, for example, don't have real love, intimacy, and affection. They just settle for being in a relationship when they don't actually have true affection and compatibility. So if one partner ends the relationship through like a divorce, for example, the other partner is like really grieving over not just the relationship, but also that fantasy bond of being connected to someone. They forget or they ignore how they used to fight, or they struggled, or were incompatible, or they ignore the things that they didn't like about that person or that relationship. It's this really unhealthy dynamic where we really idealize that person or that thing, and we really bring ourselves down and see ourselves as unworthy. A lot of what bothers us is because we put that person or that thing on a pedestal when they may not have been worth the effort. For all you know, you're better off where you are now, or you can work towards growth and improvement. Shift your perspective. Now, this sounds horrible and cliche, but Stanford researchers have found a person's basic beliefs about personality can determine whether they recover from or stay immersed in the hurt of rejection. Their studies revealed that people who had fixed mindsets and thought that, their capabilities and personality couldn't be changed were more likely to blame themselves and their toxic personalities for the relationship ending. When they experience rejection, they're more likely to second-guess themselves and criticize themselves and see future relationships as less hopeful. On the other hand, those with a growth mindset are likely to see their personality as something that can be changed or improved. They're more likely to see rejection as an opportunity to grow. They're hopeful that future relationships will get better. People with a growth mindset recover from a relationship faster. It'd be beneficial to see life as flexible and loss as one part of life that can steer us in another direction and provide us an opportunity to grow or move forward. And side note, don't listen to sad songs because they're just going to intensify the feeling of rejection, and then they're going to make it so that you're comfortable with sadness, and you don't want to get used to sadness. Number 3, pay attention to your inner critic. We're affected by the events that happen to us and by the filter through which we see what happens. What do I mean by that? Doctors Lisa and Robert Firestone have written a lot about the role of a person's critical inner voice and how it colors the way that we see the world. And sometimes it can be a mean coach that lives in our brain, criticizing us, discouraging us, undermining us, or sabotaging us. On the other hand, positive experiences can give us an inner voice or an inner critic that is encouraging and positive, a voice that's on our side. But when we're talking about rejection, that voice can often be negative and demeaning. We might say things to ourselves like, "See, I told you, you wouldn't have gotten into that school anyway. You're just not smart enough." Or, "She's out of your league. What makes you think she'd marry someone like you?" Or, "You never should have tried. Why did you bother? Because if you trust people, they're just going to end up hurting you." We have to recognize that our thoughts during a difficult time might not be the most rational or accurate. One way to release them is to write them down, or you can confide in a friend or someone that you know won't judge you and will listen to you. So you can also give yourself positive affirmations to replace the negative one. So instead of saying, "I'm a failure," you can say, "I'm a warrior," or "I'm resilient." And instead of saying, "No matter how hard I try, my work just never seems to pay off," you can say, "I put in a lot of work and it's not going where I want it to go, but I can figure out where to go from here and how to turn things around." Finally, practice self-compassion. In a University of Arizona study, researcher David Sbarra found that people who had gotten divorced but had a high level of self-compassion, and I quote, reported fewer intrusive thoughts, fewer negative dreams about the divorce, and less negative rumination. And he concluded that, and I quote, "If you pick all of the variables that will predict how you will do after your marriage ends, self-compassion really carries the day." These are his words. But what does that even mean? What is self-compassion? Dr. Kristin Neff, author of Self-Compassion, notes 3 key factors. Number 1, self-kindness versus self-judgment. The way to show self-kindness is to think about if a really close friend were going through the same thing that you are going through. How would you treat them? And the goal is to treat yourself the same way that you would treat a very close friend. I don't know about you guys, but I know for a fact that sometimes I'm a lot nicer to other people than I am to myself. This can help us be more sensitive and empathetic to our own selves. So we won't neglect our self-care. We'll actually cut our nails, we'll actually cut our hair, we'll take care of our hygiene and shower on time. It's practicing self-care, avoiding judgment, and not being cruel to ourselves. Number 2, common humanity versus isolation. Dr. Neff reminds us that no one is alone struggling, even though during a time of rejection it might feel like it. Even the most famous, the most wealthy people have experienced rejection. We all have. Remembering this connection can make us feel less like we're a victim or like we're different and isolated. Struggle is common to all of us, but we can also feel connected and hopeful about our future, because many people who have been rejected have ended up succeeding and reaching their goals. Number 3, mindfulness versus over-identification. Mindfulness is focusing on the present moment without judgment or evaluation. It can help us avoid over-identifying with painful thoughts and feelings. It's a way of just observing. That way, we won't have catastrophic thoughts just take over. Yes, rejection is difficult, but hopefully you don't let yourself sink deep into the pain of it. If that college or job or that person rejected you, just remember that you're good enough for me, and I accept you. Just keep moving forward, even if it's one small step at a time. Gambare. Feel free to share any stories you have in the comments. And I'll see you guys next Tuesday.